Welcome back to module number 2, Visual Analytics. So, in module number 1, I, I talked about what is visual analytics, what are we going to do in class. I gave you a few definitions of what it stands for, but we never talked about the design elements and what is the terminology in design. And this is what the focus on this module, where in the end we are going to start applying visual analytics in Google Fusion Table, and I will give you more instructions in the end of the module. So let's begin with visual. In compared to language or compared to mathematics or statistics or chemistry, do not have a foundation or grammar that we are accustomed to see. So what we do, what is visual usually entail? It is about points, it's about lines, it's about coordinate system. Usually we have numbers and symbols and words, but we also have shading and we have colors. And this is based on Professor Tufte, the visual discovery, his famous book, Visual Discovery of Quantitative Information. So let's start with the basic, a point. Usually a point has a lot of things that it stands out for. Example, the brain generates representation of this point and give us its own interpretation based on our background. And I will talk about what is the role of the brain in that context. But it is about the point that makes the visual more come alive. But we also have lines, and usually, again, we can talk about the physiological impact of the line direction, but it's also involved the useful of the both visual and verbal ways to make a point. And so it's basically we can learn about symbolic language, and line is part of the premises of that language. So the line composition, again, can tell you a lot about what it entails. Figure 1 and 2 or 3 or 4 can tell you different stories out of it. We also often see in visualization, we see circles. Circles that represent something. Is it full circle? Is it empty circle? Does the circle have a language or a color? And text is the same thing. Does the text make sense to us? If the text does not make sense to us, what does it stand for? One of the things that we will see, and our textbook often talk about it, is that the background needs to be clear and concise. However, if we will look at the history, we will see a lot of people that started the visual analytic movement started to use patterns in the background to make the visual more communicative. And this is part of your challenge. You're going to challenge yourself to see what type of visualization really talks about that. And of course, the biggest issue is colors. Colors with a sense of what does it stand for. Example, cultural background. Even though I am American, my background is in the Middle East. So in the Middle East, in Israel, the color of blue and the color of green is very powerful. So many of the designers that I used to work in the past use those colors to highlight things like emotion. Again, this is part of our communication, how we express or trying to make a point out of it. Let's try to start this conversation by looking at different formats of visualization, and that is the most common type: bar charts, line chart, pie chart, and plot. I talked about plot, about how it can be converted into a narrative, but in this case, we are going to talk about the design element or the statistical element that we need to address when we're using bar chart. When we are using bar chart, we usually display different quantities of a single variable data. Example, in this example, frequency of visit. And so we have monthly, weekly, twice a week, or daily, and see how it play out. Line graph usually represent the issue of time. And again, the more we will see that a lot of analytic visualization researchers use this type of graph to represent the chaos in the data. And this is part of their way to communicate. However, the foundation to our argument, the foundation of the visual display or the visual analytic display is the coordinating grid, which means that this is where we put everything into place in order for us to generate our visualization. We have the x-axis and the y-axis, and when they touch each other, it is the point, the coordinate system is 0, 0. So this is the canvas that we often require for us to generate our visualization. A pie chart is also a very popular, I gave you an examples in the last module. But the thing that about pie chart is usually when you have a large set of data, it's usually hard to understand what does it entail. And it's really nice, but again, is it communicate your objective? Plots is again part of the very popular way to examine or to display display a relationship between data sets, and it is quite easy to use. So one of the questions that some of you asked me directly after the presentation is, okay, that's great, but why are we using those alternative application and not using Microsoft Excel? So my first response is that if we will ask to do more advanced visual analytics, such as in bubble chart, such as in ring chart, such as in heat map, Microsoft Excel does not work, does not allow us to produce that. And the issue is that we need to test before we will come out. We need to test what best work for us in order for us to communicate the data that we analyzed and work so hard and be able to share that with our viewers. So bubble chart, I think if you saw the presentation, the two videos that I asked you to see, they use bubble chart to present that. And it is quite nice because it allowed us to display dimension of the data based on size, based on color, textures, and the shape of the bubble itself. Ring chart is another format of displaying visual analytics. And by doing that, it is allowed us to do comparison between similar data set. And that's where the beauty of it. So where is the analytic? Where is the statistics aspect of it? So to those who took my statistical class last semester, this small section will probably be repetitive. However, to those who never took statistics, I think that will be a background of what we are going to apply when we will start talking about visualization and statistics and how it comes to visual analytics. So we have usually in every textbook, traditional textbook in statistics, we are talking about two types of statistics: descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics is about summary, about collection and presenting and providing description of the sample data. Inferential statistics is about helping to make better decisions based on the population and based on the sample and the population itself. Okay, so I provide example of a study with the GRE scores and the mean and the variable score, and again the idea what does it really mean and how inferential statistics can help us. So basically, we are talking about two types of population, the entire population versus the sample. The population is the collection of all the events that are going to be analyzed. And we usually have two types, defined and not defined population. And if it's the population always changes, we have the issue of how to address that. In comparison, a sample is a subset of the population and needs to represent the population. It's something that is really hard to do. So we have usually in that type of analysis, we have the variable, we have the experiment, we have the analysis in order for us to understand that. And I lay out an example for that. In addition to that, we need to talk about the data itself. And our textbook talk about two types of data, categorical data and numerical data, or numerical variable. Categorical variable is our ability to, example, age. We are usually define population based on age. People who are under 21, people who are older than 21, people are over the age of 31, and so on and so on. Those are categorical data. Numerical is the average, it's the meaning of how we apply to that. And so in our textbook, you make sense of the quantitative data by applying that two types of variables, and I want you to make sure that you understand that. Now the book is down. Okay, so example about how to apply that and how to what is the attributes and what is numerical. Attributes in this case can be applied for categorical. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that sometimes we are thinking with our eyes, or most of the time we're thinking with our eyes. And according to our textbook, 7% of our body senses reside on the eyes. So how do we should interpret it, visualization? Because it is according to Ware in 2007-6, the human visual system is a pattern seeking enormous power and stability in order for us to understand that. Okay, so what does it really mean? It means that, let's take this example that our textbook provides. Table versus the visual. And the visual is not very clear. I like to point out it's not very concise, it's not very accurate, but it provides us a point. So the table in this case is much more accurate. However, if you were asked a person that you just met on the street, what is better, what is telling you the outline of the data, he will probably vote for the visual in comparison to the table that is much more concise and accurate. So this is the power of visualization that enable us to communicate the visual. So how the visual works, we have our eyes, but our eyes, what the eyes see is in the brain, and the brain usually have memories of the past that we always make up what the visual or the actual image might look like. So the brain give us a feedback or give us concise of what we are doing. So this is where we are coming into the idea of background. What works best? a background that is accurate or a background that we lay out to show what it is consists of. So figures versus background, and again the issue is what works best. And the issue is that most basic perception concern how to look at the same scene of an image and figure out what is the figure. So A versus B, what works for you best? What about ambiguous images? What do we do with that? How do we read into it, and what does it make sense? So the issue is we sometimes do not see the full picture of the image or the visual, and so the brain makes up the issue and give us interpretation. In this case, is the picture of a young stylish woman, or is it an old woman? We do not know. So that's one of the things that the Gestalt laws came up with. The idea of the Gestalt in German is the idea of finding the patterns in the image. So the idea of the Gestalt law is the law of simplicity, or the idea of how can we break the patterns in the visual in order for us to understand the parts and the sum of the parts in it. In that context, they came up with proximity. The things that we see together or group together make more sense. So they came up with the idea that the best way to emphasize relationship between different data entities is to place them approximately in a display. Example, you see two types of display. One is more accurate, more close together in comparison to the ABC that is more spread out. So this is the issue of what works best. And proximity is that if the points are closer, usually they make more sense. Similarities, again, the issue of how do we group them together. And the rule is related visual elements should look similar in order for us to remember that. So example, A and B. What do you remember? The A or the B? Or what looks like a more coherent way to remember the image? The image on B is X and point compared to A is different between the colors. Usually, most people, according to research, would say that B stands out more distinction compared to A. Continuity is another way, and the use of connection to show relationship. And this is important. What works best? What will you remember out of it from A, B, and C, the three images that display? And again, the research says usually the C is the best way to capture that, even though they are not matching. Again, it's the same example with regard to different colors or shape, and this is something that we need to be aware. Another way of using is the idea of emphasize the relationship systematically. The user systematically to relate to the elements of the visual. And again, what works best for you? What is the example of that and how it display and what is it in sync? Closure is another thing that is really important. We learn about closure in the narrative in English or in writing a story, but closure, we also have it in visual. Use of closure relation to segment visual space, group similar elements together in order for us to make the point. And again, A works better than the B because of the closure that they bring together. Relative size is also part of our terminology, part of our elements that we need to use in order for us to make the point. Similar components of patterns tend to be perceived as an object. And so what we are trying to do is use relative size to make the point. Figure and ground. Again, the background makes the things look in more concise way. So the combination of other law to segment the image into background and foreground also play part of our design, or how we apply design concepts into it. Counters is also part of it. What works best. People see where they don't really exist, and so we are trying to make it more parts of or outline to show that the idea behind it. Transparency is really important. Again, the issue of in visualization, we are talking about color corresponds, and the idea of transparency with continuous. Again, part of our vocabulary when we are talking about it. Overlap is also part of the texture that we are using to visual comparison between two patterns. And this is really important. Compare A, B, C, and D. Which one works best? Even though C has the same path in both lines, we usually don't pay attention that they are different. And so the issue is what works best. That's an issue that we will learn throughout the semester. Patterns in motion is also a part of our vocabulary that we are going to use. The notion of work and human need to perceive correspond to visual elements between different frames. Example, limit motion of elements. And again, another example, different elements using shape, color, or orientation. And again, the issue of what work best, A, B, or C. Every attributes make correlation easier. And again, this is the issue of what will be easier to make the distinction. Form and counter in the motion, again, this is part of what I'm trying to persuade you, that visual has statistic attributes that we will need to take from the visual discussion and bring it into the analysis in order for us to communicate better. Moving frames, we will talk about animation in one point and how to apply to that. So we will talk about moving frame and how we perceive that and how we generate visual moving frames, and that will be part of our analysis. Causality is another form or another term that we often use to use specific code to show the causality between one to another. An example, maximum time. How do we show that in visualization? Causality is really important. Sometimes it's the key component. And motion, as I said before, other figures, 3D figures, and how that we will talk about. Repetition is also part of it. The repetition of elements such as lines, shape, texture, and so on. Are you actually focusing on the main subject? Again, this is the issue of perceptive and how we will try to make the point out of it. So the attribute of good design, we always need to talk about the form, the length, the width, the shape, the blur, the color, the position, the motion, and that is from our textbook in page 39. And we always need to make sure that we are very precise with regard to the length and the position, and with not precise with what visual display we are going to pick up in order for us to display that. So the building blocks of information visualization or data visualization is that we are all visual people. We like to see that, we like to examine the visual, and we need to understand good decisions with regard to visualization. So the issue of building blocks of visualization help us understand. This is the theoretical aspect. I want now to address the issue of the pragmatic aspect. And in the second part of this, in this section of my lecture, I'm going to talk about geometric information with data. What is geometric data? Is usually about humans, about physical characteristic or location based on a map. So how the geographic activities on condition of humans who live there. So in the framework or the visual display, usually we are talking about maps and images, we are talking about graphs, we are talking about data, and we are talking about text. All of it, part of it. One of the most popular platforms to apply visual geographic data is the Google Fusion Table. And it is part of Google software application that they offer for free. You have to have the Google Fusion Table. You have to have Google account in order for you to do that. So you use the Google account, example, my Google account and the Fusion Table. So the Google account, you're going to start with more, and you're going to say, you're going to search for Fusion Table. And you're going to use it, connect, and it will open up the application. So in this case, you are able to do that. And in this case, I was able to look at Florida library data set. So what is the data that we are collecting here? It is from the Florida public libraries generating Google search, and it will allow you to search and provide you the ability to display that. So the issue is that it will give you the city, the library, the address, the zip code, and the phone. However, in order for us to generate this type of visualization, we need to make sure that our table is set up in order for us to do that. The city is based on location and based on the city and not anything else. So you need to set up yourself in a way that allowed you to display the visual and be able to apply that, because otherwise the library, the name of the library will not be able for you to address, to create map. The name of the library will not help the Google Fusion Table to generate a map out of it. So again, how to create a Fusion? This is the first page inside that you're going to search for public data tables. In my case, I search for libraries. So you're going to change the columns in the visual report and add the ability to do that. So your assignment in this case, you're going to search for public data that can be found in Google Fusion Table, and you're going to edit. I'm going to share with you my Fusion Table and also reference to Google Fusion Table how to generate. You're going to post it on your blog and address it and address your position posting to Canvas. However, just a good reminder, the posting that you do, I want you to keep a record of your Fusion Table map. Why? Because the next module we are going to talk about Adobe Illustrator that will allow us to provide this image more accurate information and more precise information and make it more transparent so people will understand what you are trying to achieve. So until then, I will provide you more information on Canvas. Until next time, hope you enjoy it. I'll see you next week.